Today, I'd like to talk about the theory of plate tectonics and why that is important to talking about human evolution. Have you ever looked at a map of the continents and thought they looked like puzzle pieces that could fit back together? Well, other people have noticed this also, ever since good maps were drawn. A meteorologist, Alfred Wegener, decided to look into why they looked that way. He formulated the theory of continental drift, the idea that the continents used to fit together and then drifted apart over time. Wegener put together 4 forms of evidence to support his idea that the continents had moved. The first was simply that the coastlines of continents appear to fit together. For example, it's easy to see how the east coast of South America matches the west coast of West Africa. His second form of evidence was fossil correlation. Through his research, he found that certain fossils dating between 300 to 228 million years ago match between what are now separate continents in the southern hemisphere. He hypothesized that when those organisms were alive, the continents were connected. In other words, they were not able to swim across the ocean. The only way that they could be on what are now separate continents is if they had evolved when continents were all together in one mass. One of these was the Mesosaurus. This is a small, 3-foot-long creature that lived in freshwater ponds and swamps during the early Permian, about 300 million years ago. And its fossils are found only at the southern tips of South America and Africa. There is no way that it could have crossed the salty ocean. Another was Sydnognathus, a Middle Triassic land reptile, almost 4 feet long, found only in the southern hemisphere between 228 and 247 million years ago. Lystrosaurus was a Triassic land reptile found about 250 million years ago in what is now Antarctica, India, China, Mongolia, European Russia, and South Africa. Finally, Glossopteris was a seed fern found during the Permian Triassic in all the southern continents. When you put these 4 forms of fossil evidence together, you see that the southern continents used to fit together like this. The third form of evidence that Wegener pieced together was rock and mountain correlation. He found the same rocks and mountain structures on both sides of the Atlantic. For example, the Appalachian Mountain Range is related to the Eastern Greenland Mountain Range. Also, the mountains in the northeastern United States relate to the mountains in northern England and Scandinavia. The fourth set of data that he accumulated before his death was matching paleoclimate data. He found evidence for tropical plants in what are currently cold areas and evidence for glaciation at the current equator. One bit of evidence that he found was glacial striations, which are linear gouges in rocks that result from the movement of past glaciers. He found rocks with these glacial striations in both the tropical Amazon rainforest and the tropical rainforest of Central Africa. Wegener proposed his theory of continental drift in 1912, but it was never accepted by other scientists, even by the time he died trying to collect more data in Greenland in 1930. It wasn't accepted because no one could figure out how the continents had moved. It wasn't until the 1960s that people figured out the theory of plate tectonics. The theory of plate tectonics states that the Earth's outermost layer is fragmented into a dozen or more plates that move, and this movement is the continental drift that Wegener proposed. The main features of plate tectonics are, 1, that the Earth's surface is covered by a series of crustal plates. 2, the ocean floors are continually moving, spreading from the center, sinking at the edges, and being regenerated. 3, convection currents beneath the plates move the crustal plates in different directions from each other. And 4, the source of heat driving the convection currents is radioactivity deep in the Earth's mantle. Here is a picture of the tectonic plates across the world today. Radioactive decay in the core of the Earth heats rock, As the rock is heated, it rises because it becomes less dense. As it rises, it cools off, and it spreads out, carrying with it the plate above it. As the rock cools, it becomes less dense and once again sinks. The upper mantle of the Earth is in layers. Both the continental crust and the oceanic crust are on top in what is called the lithospheric mantle. Immediately underneath is the asthenosphere. Once again, as radioactivity in the core of the Earth heats rocks, they rise up because they become less dense. As they rise up, they spread apart the ocean floor, and the rocks themselves, as they move apart, become cooler. Cooler rocks are more dense, and so then they sink back down, creating these convection currents that move the plates above them. We see three types of plate movement. The first is the one that I've just talked about, divergence, where magma comes up from the core of the Earth and moves the seafloor apart. The second is convergence, where two plates collide. When two plates collide on land, we end up with folded mountains. And the third is lateral slipping, where the heavier rocks of the oceanic crust ride down beneath the lighter rocks of the continental crust, and often in a sideways motion. And in these areas, we see earthquakes. In other words, new oceanic crust forms along a mid-ocean ridge, and the two plates are pushed apart. Subduction occurs where a heavier oceanic plate meets and goes underneath the continental plate. Where two oceanic plates meet, volcanoes may form. Where two plates collide and move laterally or sideways to each other, we see earthquakes, such as we see along the west coast of California. And where two continental plates meet, mountains may form. Paleomaps have been made showing the location of Earth's landmasses beginning from 600 million years ago. But we'll start with the point at which all the landmasses were lumped together as one, centered around the equator during the Permian period about 250 million years ago. We call this single large landmass Pangaea. At the time of Pangaea, from 250 to 200 million years ago, all of the landmasses were tropical. We find the first primitive dinosaurs and the very first mammals. These earliest mammals were probably nocturnal, that is, active at night, and small. So in thinking about the spread of mammals, the earliest mammals were present when there was just one large landmass. This is a color picture showing you some of the current landmasses as they looked when they were all stuck together into Pangaea. By the end of the Triassic, beginning of the Jurassic, around 200 million years ago, Pangaea was splitting into two large landmasses, Laurasia to the north, including what is now North America, Europe, and Asia, and Gondwana to the south, including what is now South America, Africa, Australia, Antarctica, and India. At about 200 million years ago, when Pangaea was splitting into Laurasia and Gondwana, we find a mass extinction accompanied by huge volcanic eruptions. And at this time, most of the early primitive dinosaurs went extinct, but other more adaptive dinosaurs, like the ones we're more familiar with, evolved in the Jurassic. People have debated the probable causes for this late extinction. Causes that have been put forth include global cooling or an asteroid impact, but the most recent hypothesis is that the volcanic eruptions caused massive acid rain that led to these extinctions. This extinction allowed the newer dinosaurs to expand into many niches that were now unoccupied. And dinosaurs became increasingly dominant, abundant, and diverse. They ruled the world, and they remain that way for the next 150 million years. However, there were early mammals roaming the forest floors, and by 150 million years ago, we see the first birds. So the Cretaceous period, from 146 to 65 million years ago, was dominated by dinosaurs, but mammals and flowering plants were present and developing. The first flowering plants appeared about 140 million years ago at the beginning of the Cretaceous, and flowering plants are to become important food sources for mammals and early primates because flowers produce fruit, and fruit is food. The earliest flowers look similar to modern-day magnolia blossoms. The Cretaceous ended 65 million years ago with another set of massive worldwide extinctions, including the extinction of dinosaurs except for birds. An estimated 70% of plant and animal species went extinct. Dinosaurs were wiped out 65 million years ago, we believe due to an asteroid impact. The object that hit was about 6 miles across and created a crater more than 110 miles wide. The crash would have released as much energy as 100 trillion tons of TNT, which is over 1 billion times the power of the atom bombs used in World War II. That impact left behind a huge crater called Chicxulub at Mexico. Initially, people didn't believe this hypothesis, and they couldn't find the crater because it was mostly under the sea. The first evidence of this impact was the discovery of a layer of clay around the world enriched with iridium. Iridium is rare on Earth's surface, but it's relatively common in space rocks. Hartmann has summarized the evidence to support the idea that there was an asteroid impact. The iridium excess in the 65 million year old soil layer has been confirmed at many points around the world. The same soil layer contains grains of quartz that were deformed by high shock pressures, as in a giant explosion. And the same soil layer contains enough soot to correspond to burning down all of the forests in the world, suggesting that massive fires were touched off at the time of impact. And the same soil layer, especially around the Gulf of Mexico, contains massive deposits of tumbled boulders, as would be generated in a large tsunami. The impact blew dust, soil, and rocks not only into the atmosphere, but out into space, where they fell back into the top of the atmosphere. So much dust entered the high atmosphere that the Earth was shrouded in a dust layer that blocked sunlight for several weeks or months, which would have killed some plants and disrupted the food chain. For the first few hours after the impact, rocky debris would have fallen back into the high atmosphere, creating a storm of glowing fireballs in the sky. And the radiant energy from these would have heated the surface to boiling temperature for some minutes and would have been enough to kill many animals and plants on the surface. So many species living on the surface of the world at 65 million years ago, such as dinosaurs, may have been decimated in hours, if not in weeks. This event marks the end of the Mesozoic era and the beginning of the Cenozoic era and the beginning of the Tertiary period, which is the period of main interest to us in this class. To put what I've just talked about into perspective, here is a chart showing the eras and periods, a geological chart, with the oldest periods at the bottom and the most recent at the top. Pangaea, the single large continent, is present at about 250 million years ago. All of the land masses are tropical. We see early primitive dinosaurs and the first mammals. During the time period that Laurasia and Gondwana split apart, we see mass extinctions and these early primitive dinosaurs die out. But by the Cretaceous period, the dinosaurs that we know best rule the world. We see also the first flowering plants. Huge asteroid impact at 65 million years ago, and 70% of life on Earth went extinct. This marks the end of the dinosaurs. This also marks for us the end of the Cretaceous period, beginning of the Tertiary period, the end of the Mesozoic era, beginning of the Cenozoic era, leaving us with the periods of main interest to this in our class here, the Tertiary and the Quaternary periods. To summarize, prior to 65 million years ago, continents have moved and the climate has changed. The theory of plate tectonics explains that continents have moved by continental drift. And while Pangaea was the only landmass, and when Laurasia and Gondwana were pulling apart prior to 65 million years ago, there were a lot of dinosaurs. Mammals were present, but small and probably active at night. However, flowering plants developed and became a food source for mammals. However, at 65 million years ago, an asteroid hit the Earth and all dinosaurs, except birds, went extinct. At that time, North America was connected to Eurasia, but not to South America, and most land masses were tropical or subtropical. Once dinosaurs went extinct, there was space for mammals to radiate, that is, to occupy the niches and spread out into the places where formerly dinosaurs had ruled. What is the main point in talking about plate tectonics? Well, we need to understand that the world did not always look the way it does now. And in particular, continents used to be in different locations with different climates and different vegetation. And the significance for us is that when new primate species were arising, the environment was changing. And a changing environment means that there was natural selection resulting in variation. Continental drift hasn't stopped. It is still occurring. It's thought that the oceans are spreading apart at the same rate at which your fingernails grow. Christopher Scotese of the PaleoMap project proposes what the world will look like in the future. At the top, we see a map of where the continents are located today. In the second, we see where they will be in 50 million years from now. In the third, where they'll be in 150 million years from now. And in the last, at 250 million years in the future, the continents will be back together in mostly one large landmass that Scotese has called Pangaea Ultima. You can watch incredible animations by Christopher Scotese on YouTube that show either the movement of the continents from 540 million years ago to the present, or from 240 million years ago to 250 million years in the future. However, aren't we lucky? During the rest of the class, we'll stick to just the last 65 million years ago.